While everybody's watching Ukraine on this one-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of that country, our next guest thinks we should probably be keeping another eye on China, maybe both eyes. He's the author of The Coming Collapse of China, and you can follow him on his very vital and important Twitter feed, Gordon G. Chang. He is Gordon Chang. Gordon, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Larry.
These days, we should be watching China and Russia at the exact same time because there's serious reports now that China is on the verge of giving lethal weapons, lethal support to Russia. What do you know about that?
Well, China has already been giving lethal support to Russia from the very beginning of this war. The most recent report is fascinating. It comes from Reuben Johnson of the Breaking Defense website. He reports that almost every day, a Antonov AN-124, which is the biggest cargo plane in the world, takes off from China's Zhengzhou, which is central part of the country, and it carries ammunition and other high consumption rate items to the Russian front. So that's lethal aid. And the Biden administration obviously knows about this and issues warnings, but refuses to actually impose significant costs on China for doing this. I think that we will see the Biden administration eventually get around to this because they did impose important sanctions on Russia today. And there were some secondary sanctions on other countries, including China. But they really need to go after China directly because it has been the primary backer for the Russian war effort.
Gordon, we saw Xi Jinping just have a photo op and a cozy meeting with Vladimir Putin, while this other development occurs. And I got to ask, does China have an actual strategic benefit from working with Russia on this? Or is it really just to get on our nerves? Is it really just to keep us on our heels?
That's a great question, Larry, because in many ways, Chinese diplomacy on the Ukraine war is so counterproductive. But I think, and this is just a guess, China is trying to play all sides and maintain friendships with everyone. But I think that Beijing is starting to see that that game is coming to an end and that they're going to have to choose sides. And they are going to choose Russia's side from everything that we can see. When Xi Jinping goes to Moscow, which is supposed to be maybe April, maybe May, I think we're going to see a solidification of the partnership between China and Russia. Remember, in all probability, it was China that green-lighted the invasion in the first place. On February 4th of last year, China and Russia issued their no-limits partnership. And just 20 days after that, Russia attacked.
Now, this is fascinating because the United Nations, it's almost a punchline at this point, but the United Nations voted yesterday to condemn Russia a year later for invading Ukraine and waving their finger saying, you should probably leave there, which of course it means nothing. But if the majority of the countries in the United Nations have voted that Russia is in the wrong here, and now China publicly throws their support to Russia, what does that mean internationally? Because so many of those countries are reliant on China for one reason or another.
Yes, and the fact that they were so reliant on China and voted against China on this is important. China abstained, but clearly its abstention was meant to support Moscow. The world is dividing. To answer your question, the world is dividing into two. We've got China and Russia and their proxies like Iran and North Korea on one side, and we've got most of the rest of the world on the other. And this is going to be a division which will last perhaps for decades.
All right, and as you've been saying, I think for a year now, since I've been interviewing you since the Ukraine incursion, you've been saying, from China's perspective, this is about Taiwan. And so tell us where things stand now as we've learned that the American government have committed hundreds of troops to exercises to Taiwan. In the past, we've just committed maybe 30 troops to Taiwan. Now we've got hundreds of troops going there to do military exercises. That's definitely meant to send a message to Beijing. And I believe we're training military leaders from Taipei with the Michigan National Guard. That's, at the very least, the appearance of escalation in terms of our commitment to defending Taiwan.
Well, it is an escalation, but it's certainly a lot less than what China is doing. And so we need to move much faster in all of this. And yes, Ukraine and Taiwan are together, linked together, because I think that China is watching our reactions to Ukraine, and they're taking their lessons about what they can do in Asia, whether it's Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines, who knows. But the point is that China is trying to get cues about the resolve of the Biden administration with regard to Taiwan, and they're looking for those cues in Eastern Europe.
Gordon, we love having you on as an analyst because you don't necessarily take sides with regard to American politics. When President Trump did good things, you would praise him. When you had criticisms, you would give criticism. Right now, when President Trump, running for office again, is asked about this, the sum total of his answers seems to be, well, if I were president, this wouldn't have happened. Well, it has happened. If you were advising President Trump, what should he be doing? What should he be saying? Because I get the sense that he still is trying to act like China could be our partner and then China could be our friend. We just have to negotiate better.
Yes, and actually Trump did put that out on social media that he would negotiate an end to the Ukraine war, which is absolutely the wrong thing, because if you negotiate an end and you find that Russia still holds Ukrainian territory, China's going to see that as a big green light to go after Taiwan. So that just escalates the conflict with China and Russia. Trump is not really looking for, important solutions. That he's not a Ronald Reagan. He doesn't see things in clear terms. You can't negotiate with China or Russia these days. And that's, I think, a significant failing of the Trump view of the world.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned Ronald Reagan. I mean, he didn't win office in 1980 and come in with the agenda of negotiating and making peace with the Soviet Union. He had a very clear agenda and policy. He wanted to defeat the Soviet Union. And it sounds like it's time for the next president of our country to have that same tact with China.
Absolutely. I mean, Reagan talked to Gorbachev, but only when Gorbachev knew that it was over. And that's the important thing. Reagan, those famous words, his theory of the Cold War, we win, they lose. And we need that in Washington these days, because we've had a series of presidents, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, and conservatives, who've tried to manage situations not to prevail.
I guess the bigger question here is, do we have the stomach for it? Not we as a government, but we as a people, we as an economy. Because if our corporations pulled out of China right now and decided we were going to manufacture our goods in other countries, Asian countries, South American countries, God forbid here in America, China wouldn't have the money to build up their military like they have right now. Are we willing as a nation to do that?
Not at this moment. But what we're seeing, though, is, first of all, companies are reacting to economic and business incentives, and they're leaving China for various reasons. And at the same time, Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, is pushing them out. So there's both push and pull here. But it needs to move faster, and it needs to have the President of the United States to use his powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 to force companies out of China.
We are also told that President Biden is planning on meeting with Xi Jinping. Is that advisable? Does Chairman Xi deserve the right and for that matter, the honor of having the President of the United States face to face?
The three-word answer: no, no, and no. Sorry, 4 words.
So, but he's going. Biden wants that. He's putting together B-roll, Gordon, for his re-election campaign. He wants that imagery, but it's actually going to make us weaker, it sounds like you're saying.
Yeah, and I think it's not going to be good politics, because people, I think, are starting to understand that, first of all, no agreement with China is worth anything, because China holds us to our obligations and they dishonor theirs. Yeah. Plus, also, Xi Jinping is into intimidation mode, and he wants to humiliate the United States. And Biden is, I think, not up to it right now. I mean, we saw that when they met at Bali. The optics were very pro-China, very America weak. We just can't go through that again.
Yeah, it also seems like we're a willing participant in that whole agenda of humiliating us, considering we allow the balloon to float over our country at a record slow pace for many days on end. Gordon Chang, great talking with you. I suspect we'll see you next week here in D.C. at the CPAC conference. So reserve a little space on your dance card. We want to interview you face-to-face if we could.
Definitely, Larry. That's at #1 spot on the dance card.
Oh, I'll remember that. All right. I'm not a good dancer. Gordon Chang, follow him on Twitter. It's great stuff. Gordon G. Chang. You're watching O'Connor Time.